The old bowling alley on the edge of town had been a community staple for decades. Every weekend, families, couples, and teenagers would pack the lanes, the sound of crashing pins and laughter filling the air. But beneath its cheerful surface, the alley held a dark secret, one that locals whispered about but never dared to explore. Years ago, during the final match of a high-stakes bowling tournament, a champion bowler named Jack Riley had met a tragic end. Jack was a legend, known for his perfect games and his competitive spirit. But during his final throw in a nail-biting championship, something went terribly wrong. As he released the ball, he slipped on the polished wood, falling headfirst into the ball return mechanism. His neck snapped instantly. Some say he died with his eyes open, staring directly at the scoreboard, just one pin short of another perfect game. Since that night, strange things had been happening at the alley. Every year, on the anniversary of Jack's death, the lanes would malfunction, balls would roll on their own, and the faint sound of bowling pins would echo through the empty building. People started calling it the Phantom Bowler's Curse, and many refused to set foot in the alley after dark. But for a group of 4 friends, Mike, Sarah, Jess, and Danny, the allure of the supernatural was too tempting to resist. They loved urban legends and were always on the hunt for their next thrill. When they heard about the Phantom Bowler, they made up their minds to spend the night at the alley on the anniversary of Jack's death. "Come on, it's just a story," Mike said, trying to convince the others as they approached the alley late at night. The place was eerily quiet, its neon sign flickering, casting shadows across the parking lot. The manager, who had reluctantly agreed to let them stay, warned them to leave by midnight. "Strange things happen after midnight," he said ominously, before handing them the keys. As they stepped inside, the familiar sound of crashing pins greeted them, but the atmosphere felt off. The alley was colder than they expected, and there was a damp, musty smell in the air. They shrugged it off and set up their lanes, determined to prove that the legend was nothing more than small-town gossip. For the first hour, everything was normal. They joked, bowled, and took turns daring each other to walk alone down the darkened lanes. But as midnight approached, the temperature dropped sharply and the lights flickered. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked, rubbing her arms. "It's freezing in here." Suddenly, Lane 13, Jack Riley's lane, lit up by itself. The screen overhead displayed Jack's name, followed by a perfect score of 300. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "All right, who did that?" Danny asked, nervously laughing. But no one answered. The atmosphere grew tense. Without warning, one of the bowling balls rolled down the lane by itself, hitting all the pins with a deafening crash. The lights flickered again, and faint whispers filled the air, as if someone was muttering in the distance. Jess took a step back. This isn't funny anymore." Just then, the floor beneath them trembled, and the scoreboard flashed repeatedly. Words started to appear on the screen. "One more game!" Panicked, Sarah shouted, "We need to leave, now!" But the doors to the alley slammed shut on their own, locking them inside. The lights dimmed, and a cold breeze swept through the alley, carrying with it a shadowy figure that seemed to form at the end of Lane 13. It was Jack Riley, his face twisted in a look of sheer rage, his eyes glowing with a ghostly light. Mike, the bravest of the group, grabbed a ball. "We need to play. It's the only way out." Reluctantly, the others agreed, each taking their turn. But as they bowled, the pins seemed to shift, dodge, and stand back up on their own. No matter how perfect the throw, the pins remained. Jack's figure loomed closer with every failed attempt, his presence growing more oppressive. Finally, it was Mike's turn again. His hands trembled as he lined up his shot. As he released the ball, the lights flickered once more, and Jack's figure vanished. The ball rolled slowly, almost impossibly slow, as if time itself had bent to the Phantom Bowler's will. It hit the pins, and for a moment, all was silent. Then every pin collapsed. The screen flashed game over, and the doors to the alley creaked open. The group wasted no time, sprinting outside into the cold night air, their hearts racing. As they looked back, they could see the faint outline of Jack Riley standing in the alley's doorway, his ghostly form still bound to the cursed lanes. No one spoke as they drove away. They knew they had survived something unexplainable, something dangerous. But as they passed the "Welcome to Town" sign at the city limits, Mike glanced at the dashboard clock. It was exactly 3:33 a.m., and in the rear-view mirror, he could still see the faint glow of the bowling alley's neon sign in the distance. They had survived the Phantom Bowlers game, but the whispers would haunt them forever. Jason Reed had always loved bowling. From the time he could walk, he was rolling balls down the lanes, hitting strikes like he was born for it. He wasn't a professional, but his skill made him a local legend at West Lane Bowling Alley. It was a Saturday night, just like any other, when Jason received an unusual invitation in his locker after his last game. It was an old-fashioned envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. Inside was a note written in elegant script. "You have been invited to the Tournament of Souls, midnight, Lane 13. Jason laughed. "Tournament of Souls? What, am I going to bowl with ghosts?" he muttered, assuming it was a prank set up by his buddies. The alley was known for its ghost stories, but Jason didn't believe in any of that nonsense. Still, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to stick around after hours to see what this so-called tournament was all about. The alley closed at 11, and soon the place was eerily quiet. Jason lingered, hiding behind the snack bar as the employees locked up and left. The only sound now was the faint hum of the alley's lights and the soft creaking of old floorboards. Midnight approached, and as Jason made his way to Lane 13, he noticed a strange fog beginning to roll in from the cracks in the walls, swirling around the alley like it had a mind of its own. When the clock struck midnight, something shifted. The air felt thicker, colder. Jason heard the unmistakable sound of bowling balls rolling, but he was the only one there, or so he thought. Suddenly, out of the fog, shadowy figures began to materialize, slowly taking form. These weren't regular bowlers. Their clothes were old, tattered, and their faces pale with a ghostly glow. They didn't speak, but their cold, hollow eyes followed him as he approached. Jason's heart began to race. This wasn't a prank. A large figure emerged from the mist, a towering man with a skeletal grin and eyes that burned with an unnatural light. His voice boomed, reverberating through the alley. "Welcome, Jason Reed. You have been chosen to compete in the Tournament of Souls." Jason froze. "Chosen? For what?" The figure grinned wider. "A simple game of skill. Bowl against the best, the champions of the dead. Win, and you walk out of here with your soul intact. Lose." His grin darkened. "And you'll join us. Forever." Jason's throat tightened. This couldn't be real, could it? But as he looked around, the spectral figures were all watching him, waiting. Lane 13 was glowing faintly, beckoning him to step up. He thought about leaving, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. The figure handed him a ball. It was cold, too cold like ice, and heavier than any ball Jason had ever held. "Your turn." Jason swallowed hard, stepping up to the lane. His hands were shaking, and the familiar comfort of the bowling alley felt miles away now. As he lined up his shot, the whispers started. Ghostly voices hissed around him, murmuring unintelligible words, filling his head with doubt. His heart raced as he released the ball, watching it glide down the lane. A strike. The alley fell silent. Jason exhaled in relief, but his victory was short-lived. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a tall, thin man with sunken eyes and a knowing smirk. He was clearly no stranger to the game, or to death. His ball rolled silently, effortlessly, and crashed into the pins with a perfect strike. Jason's stomach dropped. The game had just begun. One by one, the other spectral bowlers took their turns, each one more skilled than the last. Jason did his best to hold his own, but with every frame, the pressure mounted. The fog thickened, and the voices in his head grew louder, taunting him. His hands were slick with sweat, and his concentration wavered. By the 10th frame, it was clear. Jason was losing. The skeletal figure from before approached again, his hollow eyes glowing with amusement. "You're close, Jason," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But you'll need more than skill to survive here." Jason knew what he had to do. His last shot was coming up, and it was all or nothing. He took a deep breath, trying to block out the whispers, the cold, and the fear creeping into his bones. He had to focus. With a swift motion, he let the ball roll one final time. Time seemed to slow as it moved down the lane. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. The ball hit the pins, but one pin wobbled, refusing to fall. Jason's face went pale. The alley erupted in ghostly laughter, the shadowy figures closing in on him. "You've lost," the skeletal figure hissed, stepping closer. "Your soul is ours now." Jason backed away, his pulse racing. "No, I won't. Before he could finish, something changed. The fog shifted, swirling violently. One of the ghostly bowlers stepped forward, an older man in a vintage bowling shirt, his face more human than the others. He held up his hand. "Let him go," the man said. "He earned another chance." The skeletal figure glared at the old man, but after a long, tense moment, he relented with a twisted smile. "Very well. He may leave. This time." The fog receded, and the cold air lifted slightly. The other figures began to fade into the mist, their forms dissolving like smoke. Jason was left standing alone on the lane, his heart still pounding. He didn't wait to question his good fortune. He grabbed his things and ran for the door. Outside, the world felt normal again. The cold air was just a chill in the night, and the familiar sounds of the alley returned. He looked back once, seeing only the darkened silhouette of the bowling alley behind him. But as he walked to his car, Jason noticed something strange. His hands were still icy cold, and when he looked down, he saw faint ghostly imprints on his fingertips, like a permanent reminder that he had been part of something far darker than he could ever explain. The Tournament of Souls had let him go. This time. But Jason knew deep down that the next time he bowled, the spirits might not be so forgiving. It was a Friday night, and Maddie had finally convinced her friends to do something other than just watch movies at home. "Let's go bowling," she'd suggested, not expecting such an enthusiastic response. By 9 p.m., Maddie, her best friends Jenna, Ryan, and Marcus were pulling into the parking lot of the old Strikers Bowl. Strikers Bowl had been a local favorite for decades, but in recent years, it had grown quieter, older, and somewhat run down. The neon sign flickered on and off, casting a dull glow over the near-empty parking lot. It wasn't the kind of place that drew crowds anymore, especially not this late. But Maddie didn't mind. She liked the idea of having the lanes mostly to themselves. As they entered the building, the first thing they noticed was the eerie quiet. The air was stale, the usual clatter of pins and the buzz of people laughing and chatting was absent. Only 2 other lanes were in use, both by groups of older men who didn't seem to pay much attention to anything around them. Behind the counter was an old man with thick glasses and a grim expression, his eyes barely lifting as they approached. "Lane 7, he grumbled, sliding over their shoes. They grabbed their shoes and moved toward the far side of the bowling alley where Lane 7 was located, near the darker corner of the alley where the lights flickered every so often. Ryan made a joke about how it looked like something out of a horror movie, but they all just laughed it off, not taking it seriously. The game started off normal enough. Maddie, always competitive, was determined to win, but after the second round, something strange happened. Jenna was up to bowl. She swung the ball back, released it, and watched as it rolled down the lane, only to stop midway, as if it had hit something invisible. The ball just stopped. "What the?" Jenna muttered. Ryan and Marcus laughed, thinking it was just bad luck, but Maddie noticed something off. The ball hadn't just slowed down. It had come to an abrupt halt, as if it had hit an unseen wall. Before she could say anything, the ball slowly started to roll back toward them, stopping at the edge of the lane, right where Jenna stood. A shiver ran down Maddie's spine. "Okay, that's weird," Jenna said, picking up the ball again, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. This time she threw the ball harder, and it made its way down the lane, but just as it reached the pins, the lights above them flickered, plunging the alley into darkness for a split second. When the lights came back on, the pins were standing exactly as they were before, untouched. "That's not possible," Jenna said, turning back to her friends. Ryan, ever the skeptic, shrugged. "Probably a glitch or something. This place is ancient." But Maddie couldn't shake the unease building in her gut. Something wasn't right. She glanced over at the other lanes, but no one else seemed to notice anything odd. In fact, the old men bowling didn't even seem to be looking their way at all. As the game continued, strange things kept happening. Ryan's ball curved at unnatural angles, almost like someone was guiding it away from the pins. Marcus's ball rolled off the lane entirely, landing in the gutter with a loud clunk. Each time, the lights would flicker, and the temperature seemed to drop a little more. Then it was Maddie's turn. Determined to finish the game and leave, she picked up her ball and took a deep breath. As she lined up her shot, she felt an odd pressure behind her, like someone was standing way too close. She whipped around, but no one was there. Her friends were at the snack bar, completely oblivious. She shivered and quickly threw the ball. As it barreled down the lane, the lights flickered again, but this time, they didn't come back on right away. Darkness swallowed the bowling alley. Maddie froze, unable to see a thing. She heard something though, a faint, distant whisper, followed by the sound of a ball rolling. But not her ball. This one sounded heavier, slower, deliberate. Suddenly the lights flickered back on, and Maddie's heart dropped into her stomach. Standing at the end of the lane, among the pins, was a figure. Tall, shadowy, with hollow eyes staring directly at her. It wasn't human. Its arms were long and thin, and it held a bowling ball in one hand, dragging it along the lane with a soft scraping sound. Maddie stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. "Guys, do you see that?" Her friends looked up, confused. "See what?" Jenna asked. The figure was gone, just like that. But the uneasy feeling remained. Maddie grabbed her jacket. I think we should leave." Ryan frowned. "Come on, it's just a little creepy. We're fine." But Maddie couldn't stay. She couldn't explain what she'd seen, but every fiber of her being told her they needed to get out of there. "No, we're leaving. Now." Reluctantly, her friends agreed. As they gathered their things, the lights flickered again. This time, the sound of a bowling ball rolling slowly down their lane was unmistakable. They all turned in unison. At the end of the lane stood the shadowy figure once more, only now it was closer. Its face, twisted and grotesque, became clearer under the dim lights, eyes locked on them, cold and menacing. Ryan took a step back. "Okay, now I see it." Without another word, they bolted for the door, but the figure wasn't done. As they reached the exit, the sound of bowling balls smashing into pins echoed from every direction, louder and louder, until it felt like the entire alley was shaking. The lights above shattered, plunging the place into complete darkness again. They ran outside, gasping for air, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Maddie fumbled for her keys as the others kept glancing back at the door, half expecting the shadowy figure to burst through. When they finally got into the car, Maddie floored it, not daring to look back. As they sped away from Stryker's Bowl, Jenna turned pale, staring out the back window. "What is it?" Maddie asked, panic rising. Jenna swallowed hard. "The sign. The bowling alley sign. It's gone." Maddie glanced in the rearview mirror. Where the flickering neon sign of Stryker's Bowl had been, there was now just an empty, crumbling building, dark and abandoned.